How's it going? I just got back from a run. I'm not sure how long it was, distance or time, but it was long enough that I needed my super cool ultra vest just in case, because you never know, right? Kind of better safe than sorry. I don't know. Anyway, I'm back. While I was out for my run, a topic came to mind, and the topic was, what's the hardest sport I've ever done? So it was just one of these things. Like, I was thinking about all the different athletic qualities that I've tried to tap into over the course of my lifetime, at least as an athlete. And the answer is, I'm not quite sure. But let me explain. If I was to properly answer the question of what the hardest sport I've ever done is, I would have to break it into two separate answers. I would have to say what the hardest sport I ever trained for was, and what the hardest sport I ever competed in was. And if you allowed me that, then I think I could answer. It probably helps to know what kind of sports I've done. And I'll just sort of list a couple off, and it'll give you a sense of where my head's at as far as explaining which sports I think were the most difficult. And it goes like this. I have competed in a bunch of different cycling events, from cyclocross to mountain biking to BMX when I was younger, to cycling adjacent sports like duathlon and fat biking, like winter mountain biking, but on a fat bike. I've competed in every type of running event there is. I don't think I've missed any. Almost every distance. And I'm talking about since childhood to now, adulthood. I've competed in almost everything as far as that, from track to cross country to every distance that gets offered by every running store in existence. I mean, I don't think I have missed any. I haven't done like the big 100 miles or 24-hour races or anything like that. And I have zero interest in doing those because, do I really need a reason? I've fought professionally, amateur. I've done all sorts of fighting adjacent sports like wrestling and grappling and submission grappling and things like that. I've played the usual: football, rugby, soccer, and I've had a pretty rich and varied life as far as sports are concerned. Powerlifting, shouldn't forget that. I can't really think of all of the sports I've done. Probably boring you with this, trying to list all these sports off. Basically what it comes down to is this. If I was to choose the sport, the hardest sport that I have ever done, I would break it into the hardest sport I ever trained for and the hardest sport I ever competed in. And if you let me break the sports down that way, the answer is easy. Here's what it looks like. The hardest sport to train for is running. And I almost don't care what distance you're talking about. Running is just a hard sport to train for. If you go too fast too soon, you get injured. If you go too far too soon, you get injured. If you do too much of anything too soon, you get injured. That's a through line when it comes to training running. There are entire industries built around running injuries. There's an entire shoe industry built around thinking that you can prevent running injuries just by changing your shoes. Running is the hardest sport I have ever trained for. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, it's probably the easiest sport I've ever competed in. Running is the hardest sport I've ever trained for, easiest sport I've ever competed in at any distance, from 50K all the way down to 100 meter. Easiest sport I've ever competed in. Almost all your injuries come from training for running. Almost none of them come from competing in running. The easiest sport I ever trained in, is that the right way to say that? The sport that was the easiest to train in was mixed martial arts, MMA. If you don't know what MMA is, you probably know what the UFC is, Ultimate Fighting Championship. That style fighting. I fought professionally in mixed martial arts, aka UFC style fighting. MMA was easily the most fun to train. It was the most entertaining. It was the most interesting. I looked forward to doing it every single day. I'm not saying that training for mixed martial arts, like for a professional fight, is easy. It's not by any means. Every session is challenging. And if your camp is like 3 months, 4 months long, plus whatever lifetime experience you're bringing to that, I mean, yeah, it's difficult. Holy crap, can you even hear me with all that wind? It was never a grind. I loved every moment of it. I enjoyed it. And I looked so forward to doing the fight. It was just one of the highlights of my athletic life. The fight, on the other hand, the fights are hard. You will never compete in a sport more difficult than mixed martial arts. There are so many variables in a mixed martial arts match that it is almost impossible to account for all of them. Mixed martial arts, most fun to train for. Most difficult to compete in. Running, most difficult to train for, easiest to compete in. What about you? What's the most difficult sport you ever trained for? What's the most difficult sport you've ever competed in? I would actually love to hear your opinion on that, because I know my opinion won't be popular necessarily with runners or with mixed martial artists or with somebody else that likes a sport that I didn't mention, but that's the nature of the internet, isn't it? Everybody has an opinion. Anyway, those are my opinions. I'd love to hear yours. Mixed martial arts in general, those are life skills. Like, they're right up there with like first aid or learning to change a tire or, you know, being able to build a shelter in the woods after a plane crash. I don't know.